Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I am your host, JP John Poz from the Two Man Power Trip. And of course, my co host is the financial wrestling genius himself, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
Doing good. So last week we had a TNA deep dive. This is not a rerun. We are going to dive even deeper from a Anthem sports and entertainment perspective to really understand TNA and its positioning. We have to understand Anthem. That feels like some sort of like Karate Kid symbolism, which I'm not sure the exact quote right now. But in the same way that you'd imagine, like sometimes you're doing analysis of WWE, you have to understand Endeavor, TKO, UFC to understand WWE. So rather than like a ground up perspective, want to start from the top, even get a little bit historical, and learn as much as we can.
So, this is not only a deep dive, this is really a TNA Wrestling business special. We're going to be focusing in on TNA Wrestling. So, where do you stand on the current state of TNA Wrestling?
So put this out there in the X universe. Of course, not a scientific poll, but there's a lot of positivity to TNA from longtime supporters. Sometimes we've questioned like if they put their money down at that support, and sometimes there's a lot of negativity. So this poll was done on June 1st. So this was, of course, the WWE relationship. Exactly what it is isn't clear, but obviously there's a relationship. The Quebec ticket sales have been out, but staff changes continue to come, which we'll get into later. But almost 44% said it's going great. 30% said positives, but there's some concerns. Just 4% said that the cutbacks mean the sky is falling. I'm somewhere between positives but concerns and cutbacks, the sky is falling. How about you, John?
Probably maybe positives, but concerns. I don't think the sky is falling necessarily, but it is interesting though. Like just the corporate structure of things is interesting. For instance, the Northern Pacific Group are the same people still like in charge, or have we seen a big change?
Yeah, so the first thing that we want to go back to is even before Anthem Sports and Entertainment was announced as purchasing Impact, or what's known as TNA, what had been known as TNA, before we want to understand this Northern Pacific Group investment or acquisition as much as we can. So in January 2017, Anthem Sports and Entertainment acquired what is now known as Impact, or TNA. The narrative in the world of wrestling has thus far focused on the management of Anthem, namely Leonard Asper. What has often not been explored is a transaction conducted about 4 months prior to the acquisition, a deal between Anthem and Northern Pacific Group. According to Crunchbase, Anthem Sports and Entertainment was acquired by 2016. Important to emphasize is it is not listed as an investment but an acquisition. The company was acquired as a leveraged buyout and kept as a separate entity. Anthem is listed among its portfolio. Scott Honor, managing partner of NPG, currently serves on Anthem's board of directors. What is a leveraged buyout? A leveraged buyout is the acquisition of another company using a significant amount of borrowed money to meet the cost of acquisition. The assets of the company being acquired are often used as collateral for the loans, along with the assets of the acquiring company. Per the company's LinkedIn profile, NPG is a lower middle market private equity fund focused on acquiring rapidly growing businesses. With an upper Midwest focus, NPG invests in industries, technology, and business service industries. NPG is committed to achieving rapid value creation for its companies through active principal involvement and operational improvements. Focused on rapidly growing Midwest businesses, NPG targets double-digit revenue growth and or acquisition growth strategy businesses with revenue of $10 to $100 million. NPG provides proven companies with the capital necessary to execute on organic and acquisition expansion opportunities, as well as provide liquidity to existing owners. An example of the reach of NPG Last couple of years, they sold a company called Pipeworks for almost $100 million. In an article in January 2017 in the Financial Post titled My Terms, Leonard Asper's interview. It includes the following. Anthem's expansion efforts are also being fueled by a recent round of funding in September. Anthem secured an undisclosed investment from NPG, a growth equity investor based in Minnesota. Cook M&A Finance Services reports that Invicta Fighting was acquired by Anthem via its financial sponsor, NPG, through a leveraged buyout. In addition to Invicta, Anthem has been aggressive in purchasing media assets, including a majority stake in Access TV and HDNet Movies. But here were some lingering questions, which pretty much still remain. What is the exact relationship between NPG and Anthem? Crunchbase lists an acquisition, but an article lists undisclosed investment and financial sponsor. I actually emailed NPG Investor Group this week to get some clarity. What do they say? As of press time, I have not heard back.
Man, we got to get an answer from them. We have these lingering
If
questions we need
NPG
to know.
owns the majority or minority, right? Firms like this don't just invest because they like sports or wrestling. There's an endpoint where they want to not only make their money back, but make more than that, right? Multiples of that. What will the use of a leveraged buyout as an acquisition strategy mean for the growth of Anthem in the future?
Very interesting. So what about the Anthem purchase? What about that end of things?
So, every couple of years feels like 10 years in the pro wrestling landscape now, but we forgot some of the Mishugas with Billy Corgan and what was that production company that tried to start a lucha company later and so on. So moving ahead of all that, just to kind of situate ourselves in terms of understanding Anthem's acquisition. So this was from the New York Post at the time. Anthem Sports and Entertainment announced an agreement to acquire a majority interest in TNA Impact Wrestling, a move that strips former majority owner Dixie Carter of her chairmanship title and leaves her with a minority position. That's interesting. I don't remember ever hearing Dixie divest of that minority position. It wouldn't necessarily need to be publicly announced, but it's just something I didn't remember. That's why sometimes going back on these things are interesting. AS&E, already TNA's Canadian broadcast partner, emerged as a white knight for the Nashville-based wrestling outfit during last year's legal battle with Billy Corgan. Corgan claimed certain provisions of his loans to TNA entitled him to Carter's voting shares. As TNA's president at the time, he sued the company and sought a temporary injunction. A Tennessee court judge dissolved the injunction and determined TNA was not insolvent in a way that ceded control of Corgan. Anthem had already set up a credit line for TNA by then and offered to repay Corgan the $1.8 million in last-minute loans he made to the company. It also installed executive Ed Nornholm as TNA's managing director to oversee major decisions. After some bitter exchanges on Twitter, Corgan and TNA agreed to part ways at the end of November. I look forward to seeing where Anthem's leadership takes the company in 2017 and wish them the best. Anthem said it had set up a new division, Anthem Wrestling Exhibitions, to manage TNA and Fight Network, its multi-platform channel dedicated to combat sports. Nordholm was named president, and Carter was added to the advisory board of Fight Media Group, which holds all of the combat sports-related assets. We have worked hard to find the right company who would acquire TNA, use its strategic influence, and have a long-term commitment to the brand, Carter said in a statement.
Very interesting. The thing is, to me, right now, when you look at what's going on, like, okay, Anthem, everything happened, but there's so much more of a staff transition or staff change now. Like, why is that happening now as far as like Dave Sahadi being gone, right?
Yeah, so we're trying to read the tea leaves in terms of why why there is so much of a transition point. It feels like, as we've talked about in our archives for years, sometimes it feels like TNA is like, okay, we're gonna go for it now. Run more events, go live, bigger venues, sign talent, try and get Punk, that sort of thing. And then other times it's like, let's pull back. We're gonna tape from the same venue, all that sort of stuff. So we'll probably speculate. I mean, we will speculate on it at the end, but first we want to just see like the scorecard. Who are all the staff that transitioned before we start talking about who's there? So David Sahadi, of course, who was with WWE forever, and then TNA, pretty much off and on for a long time with a stint at MLW as well. So the creative director, people seem to love like the video packages and everything else that he did. So R.D. Evans, he was considered the head of creative and was a producer, is also gone. Apparently he left on his own volition. John, do you remember the story with RD where like Vince McMahon was like bullying him in creative and he was just like, I'm done, and just sort of got up at the time? This was around 2019.
Yep. I remember that. Yeah. Crazy, but true. Yeah. Yep.
So interestingly, I actually worked on a project with RD. Great guy. We spent about 4 days together, along with a couple others, working on something in LA. Unfortunately, didn't get off the ground. Not either of our fault. It was like almost there, and then it came to light somebody else that the producers couldn't get behind, and that was the end of the project. But really good guy, very passionate about the product. I remember him. This was about the time he was like just starting with them and like sort of finalizing his deal and so on. And he was like really excited about those retro TNA shows. I forgot what they were called, but sort of, then we started notice that Lou DeAngeli, the vice president marketing, was gone. It was announced that people were gone from live events department. So of course, his name came up. But it's interesting because it's not just TNA. He was doing marketing for various aspects of Anthem, including Access TV and Invicta. Also, let's see here. And this Lily Arenalo was Lou's assistant in the live events department. Of course, this goes back to the spark of Scott D'Amore being let go right after the TNA rebranding. And JML, who I think we talked about last week, who noticed that Richard Schaefer from Golden Boy is no longer listed among the executives, and Anthony Ciccione has the title of president of sports. So just wanted to reflect back on that a little bit, because in March 2023, there was the announcement of a number of these talents of coming in to help the company, and it wasn't right. So it's just about 15 months ago. Drawing on more than 20 years of experience in the combat sports and boxing realm, Schaefer will oversee ASG and play a key role in building strategic partnerships and relationships with leading sponsors, brands, agents, and athletes. The hiring of Schaefer is a testament to Anthem's commitment to building global prominence of its events and broadcasts. So if you were to look at that in reverse, with Schaefer not being there, what is their commitment to building a global brand of events and broadcasts? Under Schaefer, ASG will aggressively pursue additional acquisitions in the combat sports and pro wrestling business. So I'm not aware of any acquisitions. Schaefer's wide-ranging background in boxing will also be leveraged to establish a boxing platform. I'm not aware of that happening. Richard Schaefer is a major force in the combat sports and boxing arena. Anthem president Asper said, one of the industry's most respected executives. He leads with integrity and brings an unprecedented wealth of expertise, and so on. State Schaefer, I am beyond thrilled to be joining the Anthem team, and ASG, Len Asper, and Norm Holmes, Scott D'Amore, and Shannon Knapp have built a fantastic business. Anthem has also brought in 2 senior executives and promoted Scott D'Amore to president to highlight of Impact at the time, to highlight its goal of growing the sports group. D'Amore and Shannon Knapp, the president of Invicta, will report to Schaefer. Scott has established himself as the leader of Impact since joining us in 2018, establishing the promotion as one of the finest wrestling promotions in the world, Nordholm said. Schaefer will also be working with former WWE and Cirque du Soleil executive Lou D'Angeli, who has joined Anthem Sports as vice president of marketing. In this role, D'Angeli is overseeing all aspects of marketing, advertising, promotions, and public relations for Anthem. D'Angeli has more than 25 years of experience in events marketing. In just a few months, Lou has been a leader in increasing awareness and attendance at Impact and Invicta, Nordholm said, with his past experience in event promotion and marketing such iconic brands. Anthem, okay, and then there was a partnership with Mike Pine and Talon Partnerships. I haven't looked into if that continues.
What about the leadership now? Like who is really kind of at the helm? Is Asper still there? Is Nordholm still there? What's going on as far as the tippy top?
Yeah, so putting aside NPG and whatever influence that they have, we know one of their influences is having a member on the board. So they have that sort of guidance. But whether NPG fully owns Anthem and then dictates to Asper isn't clear, but we do know Asper is the president and CEO of Anthem Sports and Entertainment. From what I understand, he comes from a family that was in pharmaceuticals, so a wealthy family, and then later he got into purchasing media rights. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But his background, according to the website, 30 years of media experience, founder of Anthem in 2011, CEO of Conwest Global Communications, 2000-2010, VP, President of Development, and so on, Chairman Rumble Gaming, Chair Asper Foundation, graduate of University of Toronto School of Law. Okay, so that's at the top. Next, and I don't know because taking a step back from TNA operations, as we used to hear his name all of the time, of course, related to Jeff Jarrett and all those in the early Anthem days. When I think of Ed Nordholm, I think of the owl symbol, but he is still there, one of the most powerful people there. Ed Nordholm is the chief corporate officer of Anthem. He oversees the corporate activities of M&A, partnerships, and investors. He plays a key role in the supporting of the operational leaders of achieving their strategic plans. He's board member, general counsel of Anthem since 2010, member of original financing to launch the Fight Network and serve as the president of the Fight Network from 2008 to 2010. So here's some notes. Former Impact Wrestling Ed Nordholm also no longer working with TNA. This was from a wrestling website a couple of years ago. Nordholm was replaced as president by D'Amore. So Nordholm was the president of TNA or Impact. Nordholm was replaced as president by D'Amore, who was EVP and got promoted a year ago. Nordholm still worked with the company through his role in Anthem Sports and Entertainment. Of course, we don't want to forget that, during these transition periods, right, not only was it Scott D'Amore, but it was the Jackal. Why am I remembering his shoot name?
Don Callis.
Don Callis,
Don
thank
Callis.
you. Than his actual name. I'm thinking back to those
97
WWF.
WWF.
Yeah. But, so that was like another transition. There was rumors of like inappropriate behavior or acquisitions. I can't speak on that at all. That was just like put out into the pro wrestling media for a while, which got quieter on that. But he was there in a significant role. Nordholm still worked with the company through his role in Anthem. He was removed from TNA a few years ago. It was noted that Nordholm and D'Amore's removal happening around the same time are directly related. It was Nordholm that reportedly pushed Anthem to make offers to CM Punk and Will Ospreay, which the company agreed to do at the time. Punk eventually went to WWE. Ospreay got a better offer from AEW. So we know those two. We just have to learn a little bit more about some of the other people. So Anthony Ciccione is the president of sports. He's been affiliated with them since 2008, vice president of operations. More than 30 years of broadcast and digital media experience, oversees all operations and financial performance of the entertainment group, including TNA, Invicta, Game TV, Game Plus, Fight Network, Anthem Media Services. He's also responsible for broadcast and IT support. So I guess if your Wi-Fi is down, you call Anthony. No, I'm joking. 10 years of VP of Programming and Production at The Score, and that crossed over to a little bit of WWE. 10 years as sports producer at Global Television Network, various roles, and so on. And finally, and this was the person that was listed as sort of like under Anthony, running like the day-to-day now of TNA, Ariel Schnerer. So he's another longtime person. So let's see, when you go back all that way, 2006. So he started as a programming manager and webmaster for Fight Network for 8 years. Then he moved his way up to senior director programming global distribution, 2013 to 2020. So he's the one that distributed them to 200 countries. No. So actually, an interesting note I forgot to put in my notes. So maybe it's coincidental, or maybe there was a typo at one point. I think that they might have listed this number of countries prior to last week. But remember there was the headline of our show that TNA was distributing 200 countries. It's back in the press releases to 120 now. Then he became Director Global Distribution Impact Plus 2016 to 2020, General Manager of the Fight Network, which is the President, and now Vice President of Business Development, Anthem Sports, for nearly 4 years. So one of the things that we see is sort of circling back to people that that are long time with the company. Sometimes certain companies have their own culture and they sort of like lean back to people, maybe like, not to talk about WWE culture overall and make comparisons there, because obviously we know that there's a lot of issues now, but like, that Vince would go back to Bruce Pritchard. So maybe there were people that were more talented producers or had more. You can see here, Len Asper leans on people that he's worked with for years and years and years, who grow inside the company, even though sometimes their aspirations are to bring in bigger names. It doesn't seem to work out. It always seems to go back to who they have.
Now, Tommy Dreamer is basically in charge, like not necessarily on the flow chart, if you will, but he's really the guy in charge.
So that seems to be what people are saying, that Jordan Grace said, and what I'm not saying that this hasn't exactly how she feels, but obviously as being the company representative and getting a lot of opportunity that she deserves to be on NXT and be sort of the face with WWE connection. She said that she doesn't feel like it's much different, that the more with Demar being gone, she just goes to Tommy Dreamer and everything's kind of the same. And Tommy Dreamer said that, it's all good. And he goes to the management. So it's not exactly clear if it's like Schnerer to Tommy Dreamer and then to whoever is underneath Tommy Dreamer. Maybe it's like, maybe there's certain divisions and so on. So like, I don't know if the guy that does PR for TNA like reports to Tommy Dreamer or he just reports to Schnerer. So that part is unclear.
Now, what about some of the portfolio, if you will? What's in Anthem's portfolio?
Yes, so to really understand Anthem, you have to know, of course, what they own. So obviously Access TV, which was, an interesting story at the time, where they didn't want Impact. I think it was like they didn't want TNA or Impact on the network at that time, and then Anthem bought it, and then they kicked New Japan off. So Access TV, HDNet Movies, sort of like the younger cousin sort of to Access TV. Gravitas Ventures, which is a worldwide film distributor. We'll get into that in a moment. Fight Network, which has, I think, good distribution in Canada. They have some distribution in various countries. I think like the Balkans. Obviously TNA, Invicta, which hadn't run a show for a long time. Game TV and Game Plus, which are networks here. One of them is on like an upper tier for my cable station. Interestingly, that one doesn't air TNA, but it airs OVW. So I'm not sure when that happened, but on most of these assets, they air TNA. Sort of like not unlike Sinclair when they would own, of course, Ring of Honor, and they would utilize it all around. But if it seems like there's trouble, sort of like overall with Anthem, well, just as an example, Gravitas just acquired a horror thriller called "I'll Play Mother." So no financial details were discussed, but it shows that, I mean, as a movie distribution company, you have to acquire assets, but it doesn't seem like a company like Gravitas is slowing down. So it could be like a shifting of assets where, they might say, okay, less to TNA. Let's say we see more potential in Gravitas. John, what I was thinking about today? Do you think a company that owns a wrestling company ever thrive? Meaning that, like, right, like for WCW, for Ring of Honor, for TNA, the parent decides how much they're going to allocate payment to the wrestling company for producing of its, for it providing programming to its distribution channels. So it's like it's hard to grow yourself. Do you think that restricts the wrestling company from?
Yes, definitely. I always thought that with WCW too, because it's like if they're not really behind it, they're kind of restricting it from growing. And as we're learning, obviously, more and more from the Nitro book and Who Killed WCW, the documentary. I mean, if you don't want the thing to grow, it's not going to grow. Or you think, oh, wrestling, they only needed this amount of budget, and they should be doing fine. They should grow. They should be making more money. I do think it actually hurts them. That's why I think AEW might be in a better position. I know not yet, but maybe in a few years where it's like, okay, they can get paid from an outside, WBD or whatever, and you make money that way, and you use that production cost, and you probably get more money because when you're owned by Turner, they're only allocating a certain amount for your production costs, and then you kind of got to figure out the rest. Like the profitability end game, it might not be there if, let's say, Turner owns you.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And again, it brings up that point in terms of like what was rumored about, which is that WBD has a stake in AEW. And maybe that's why Tony Khan feels like so connected and loyal and keep driving it back to there. So that might, he said he'll never give up controlling shares, but sort of like tethering them to WBD, which is a good place for them to be. But if they're not exploring other offers as much, it restricts them.
Yep, for sure. So as far as some other stuff going on with them, what about distribution?
So, like I mentioned, they're not in more countries than are in the known universe. Okay, so it's funny. I mean, this is old. This is from 2000. When I grabbed an announcement, Zone distributing Anthem, that Impact at the time, as it was called, listed 170 countries. So, and then 170 plus later. But so we know, at least in terms of the latest press release, that it's 120. So it could vary. But and DAZN, as we know as well, like it's sort of, they'll put them in a lot of countries, but it's also somewhat like limited in terms of, being digitally distributed. But in terms of like a platforms, they're, I would say that's one of their strengths. So of course, USA, you have Access TV. Now, which we'll get into in a moment, like TNA Plus they're leaning into that more. In Canada, you have the Fight Network. You have the Game channel that they own as well. In the UK and Ireland, there's Sky. and then there was another one. I don't know if they added to the graphic, right? That was also going to show like reruns as well. In Mexico, they're on MVS. In India, I think they're still on that. Like, I don't think it's called Eurosport anymore. Um, in Africa, they're on Star Times, which that crosses over into a number of countries. So that's where you start getting that like okay, so you have the zone is 40 to 60 or whatever it is, and then Star Times is in X number of countries. So that's how you like grow that number very quickly. And then the Fight Network is on, like I mentioned, some of the Balkan countries like Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, but also Bulgaria, Turkey, and Portugal.
Now, as far as the events itself, what's going on there? Because we love to talk about the actual shows, attendance, etc.
So Cicero Stadium is looking good for them. Good market for these national or brands. I want to say off brands, but like the non WWE AEW brands now, right? With MLW just doing well in Cicero Stadium, doing really well. We're selling it out now. I don't know in terms of general seating what it looks like for Cicero for TNA, but in terms of their reserve seats and looking at the map, it looks to be like the tickets are all gone there. Fair amount of seats left on the second day. So second day tapings are always hard. It was announced with Lou D'Angeli leaving that he was of the mind that they shouldn't do second day tapings in the same city. Obviously, that's clear not only with TNA for years, but Ring of Honor would always struggle. I even remember that Ring of Honor had Samoa Joe return to the promotion on the second day, and it was still like hard to sell tickets. I think it was even in New York, and I think it was in Massachusetts that the Young Bucks, they were giving the second day away DVDs for Ring of Honor, and that was tough as well. With the 2300 Arena, plenty of tickets remaining. And of course, Slammiversary doing very well. So somebody DM'd PCO and then posted the DM, and they're like, "How many tickets sold?" So he wrote 2,000, which I think sounds like a reasonable number to me. And it looks like they're doing well the second day as well. I was sort of joking that they got rid of their events department. Does somebody know the Eventbrite password to get back in? Right, they were going to their ticket sales, but I been accessed yet. And they also announced August 2nd and 3rd in Tampa, Florida. So that's all that's been announced. So less than 2 months away from their last announced taping, and speculation in terms of what they'll do next, which we'll talk about in a little while.
Funny, just talking to two different people about that show in Philly. So depending on what I'm doing in the family, I might have to make a stop by, maybe once or twice to the arena to see some TNA. But what's going on with TNA Plus?
Yes, and John, if you go, I need a hand count.
Yes, yes,
How many are there? So
yeah.
TNA Plus. So it's interesting. Like, it's been called different names, but it is something owned by Anthem. It's an asset. It's something that they control, and they continue to put a little bit more emphasis on it for the hardcore. So as we talked about last week, the premium YouTube Insiders content has been discontinued outside of the cheapest tier that used to be there, and they're sort of directing people now to TNA Plus. And there was like a I don't know what you call it, like a 2-hour blackout or embargo of airing the show, and it premiered on Access, and then it would be on TNA Plus, I think 2 hours later. But now it airs concurrently at the same time as as Access. I don't know like how big a deal this is in like overall, but in terms of subscribers, where the money goes directly, that there's more emphasis. Obviously, they're spending the money on TNA Plus because they are having endeavor to host it, which sometimes like one corporate arm has nothing to do with the other, but obviously you could see from parent relationships that this might have helped facilitate the TNA WWE relationship, right? Like if WWE keeps TNA stronger and they get more TNA Plus subscribers, they'll renew with Endeavor and so on. So not the biggest deal. And we'll talk a little bit later, like speculate on the WWE relationship, but it's, something that you could look at from like top level down.
Let's talk a little bit about FAST, because I know our buddy Gavin Bridge is all over it. What about the FAST channel, the free ad-supported television?
So lucky for us, we are connected to the most knowledgeable FAST expert in the world, Gavin Bridge. And DM'd him, and I was like, we're doing this special. Can you give me the numbers for TNA and Anthem related FAST channels, especially related to like I think he looks at like certain of the bigger FAST channels. There's many that are sort of off the radar. It doesn't mean that TNA distributes those anyway, but looking at consistently of these bigger FAST channels. So things are pretty much even in terms of their distribution between this year and last year. A difference is that last year they were on something called Local Now. So according to Gavin, Local Now is not so big, so it may have been Anthem's decision to drop them, but the platform has also been playing lots of channels in the last few months. So Fight Network is on 5 platforms: Freevee, Plex, Redbox, Sling, Freestream, and Xumo Play. Access TV Now is on Plex, Redbox, Sling, Freestream. TNA Wrestling, which is the most distributed in terms of volume of these big platforms, is on 9. Freevee, Google TV, Plex, Pluto, Redbox, Roku, Samsung, Sling, and Xumo. TNA Wrestling en Espanol is on VIX. So just a comparison between this and other wrestling promotions. Obviously, WWE's is the most lucrative with Peacock, and that's just on.
What about some speculation for TNA? What do
Just seeing
you
the
got
updates
going on?
there. Sorry, John, can you repeat that?
Oh, I was going to say, what about some speculation? Do you have some speculation on what's going on with TNA?
Oh yes. So I might have it might have dropped out, but I just wanted to repeat the other wrestling channels.
Oh yes.
So Lucha Libre AAA is on 1 platform, Pluto TV. Ultimate Classic Wrestling is on 2, Plex and Redbox. WoW is just on Samsung TV Plus. Wrestling League Network is on Local Now, so they remained on Local Now. So that's that. So I think now we can get into the speculation. So, John, what do you think about it? Is this cost cutting? Cost cutting for sale? Something to WWE imminent? What do you feel?
It's funny, when I saw that NXTNA thing, I was like, man, they're definitely selling. That just was like my gut reaction when I first saw it. It just smelled of something like of that.
That's really interesting. So like you take a brand and like you take a sub brand of a brand, so WWE to NXT, and then you take NXT to TNA, right? Because they're already committing to CW for NXT. So now if they take over TNA, that they have another means of distributing it and maximizing that money.
Yep.
And it's also like by putting the NX, that's really smart because it's not TNA right anymore, which we talked about sort of like something limited. So one of our friends in the world of business pro wrestling analysis had this to say about the WWE relationship. I'm told the reason WWE is pursuing the relationship with TNA is that the UFC antitrust suit has Endeavor worried. So they want WWE to seem more open to working with others in wrestling to potentially protect them from antitrust allegations in the future. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And PW Insider said, we have heard that TNA are trying to lock in a new permanent location where they should produce television, perhaps even live weekly. So, it used to be that cost of like satellite, uplink to go live. Now, of course, you could do it over the internet, driving down the costs. So I don't know if they need to go live, but it just makes sense. Not necessarily like from the same venue every week, but maybe if they have two or three, so it doesn't feel like ultra stale, but like somewhere that they can house their ring and that sort of thing. So I know that they've had in Nashville, the studio. There's been speculation of Full Sail. Obviously, the relationship isn't the same in Canada with the college anymore, but those sort of things where you can maybe move around, or even like to figure out, okay, where the town base, that we don't have to keep flying them in and out. But I don't think, John, that we start seeing cutbacks in terms of talent, right? There's not been a lot of migration there. We still continue to see like WWE names coming in.
Yep. Matt Hardy.
Yeah, and he has his options, right? If he wanted to work the indie, I mean, he could still do that, obviously. But if he wanted to just solely work the indies, right? Jeff is going to be free soon, and they can do the autograph signings and get a good appearance fee still, I'd imagine. Nick Nemeth and so on. So we haven't seen that sort of austerity in terms of talent yet. But I think that if I was going to guess anything, that it's probably just cost cutting and just driving down the cost, because every time they go out the door, I would guess that they lose money.
Interesting though, like wouldn't you cut talent first and start getting rid of guys, not add guys? So that's kind of like a caveat, like a little swerve, as somebody would say, the swerve, bro, the swerve. But that's like a little bit of a swerve to me.
I guess they sort of see it as like, if you have top tier talent at whatever level, or like the best talent that you can at this level, then that will be most appealing to pro wrestling fans. But if like you have the name brand, but if people just don't know the talent, then it's hard to like keep that appeal going. And something that's seemingly worked for them is like continuing to have names and build up 22 years of content, which in their description and so on, they always like lead with that information. So maybe they sort of see having the paying for the talent as the most important thing, but also like anytime you go on the road, you're flying people in, you're booking venues, you're going loading in, you're loading out. It just gets very expensive.
Yes, and maybe the biggest surprise of all, I can't believe sign guy Dudley Lou. I can't believe he's gone. Lou D'Angeli. I can't believe that.
Yeah, that seemed like really smart pickup. At the time, like if I was a headhunter and I was like, okay, who can run our live events? I'd be like, well, he not only has WWE experience, but he has Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah.
But again, I think Asper look who's in charge. Look who's in these different positions now. I think he leans back on people that he knows. And what's her name? Shannon Knapp of Invicta. Like, I'm curious, right? Because she came in as like having owned Invicta, but they haven't run too many shows with her. Not to speculate on somebody's future, but I'm just curious about her ultimate role in the company. She may one day take on more, right? Like if they're limiting with Invicta, but you don't often see, as we've seen over the years, if you look at the tea leaves, somebody that comes in with such a different background, like continuing to thrive. Whereas the only other operational leadership team is more of the sales teams, and we've sort of covered those news bits as they've come out about those sort of hirings. But in terms of like creatives or senior management, it's all sort of like built internally.
Now, good luck to TNA. Good luck to NX TNA, and hopefully thriving. Anything else as far as this business special, this business review on TNA?
No, but I now it makes me curious. I want to look up the on Justy or whatever. Has anyone filed for an NXTNA trademark?
Yeah, good call. They probably have, to be honest. I would guess. But
Yeah.
let's head.
Otherwise, we should do it, John, before the show
Yes.
drops.
Yes, before they realize. Yeah, good call. But let's head towards the plugs. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Two Man Power Trip. Lavie, what do you got?
Yeah, if you want to see my original article on the Northern Pacific Group and some of my other long form articles and book reviews, check out lioncubjobsearch.com. Follow me on X at Lavie Marg, LAVIEMARG, and check out our LinkedIn group, The Business of the Business, the pro wrestling industry, which includes job listings.
All right. Lavie, thank you. Great review. Great job. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. See you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.